My name's Bonnie Bacon. I am an education program specialist in the Division of System Supports K-12 with OSSI, and I'm giving this webinar today in support of the 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant team. We are going to discuss how to do reimbursement requests for the 21st Century grant for this year, for FY22. For a little bit of housekeeping, everyone is on mute in the GoToWebinar session, the way that this works, but please use the questions section to post any questions. I can see the tools in the dashboard section of the presentation view, and so I'll be monitoring that. And if I miss anything, we also have a Q&A period at the end, and you're welcome to I may even be able to unmute. I'll see if I can do that. Otherwise, you can just type in any questions and I'll repeat them and address them. In our agenda today, we'll provide information on how to sign up for automated clearinghouse enrollment in order to get payments for the reimbursement requests that you make for the grant. We'll do an overview of the 21st Century Reimbursement Request Review process. We'll give you some tips for successfully requesting reimbursements and getting approval on the first submission. We'll have a little webinar participant activity, a brief quiz that will hopefully be easy. And we'll give you some examples of reimbursement notifications that are provided to grantees in the event that a reimbursement request needs to be returned to a grantee in order to get a revision. And then we'll have little questions and feedback at the end. All right, ACH enrollment. The automated clearinghouse payments are deposited directly into your bank account electronically. It's the way to get paid, to get the actual payment for your approved reimbursement requests. The electronic payments allow you to eliminate the risk of mailing delays, have immediate availability of funds, avoid the hassle of travel time to deposit checks, and avoid having to wait for check clearance. You need to please contact OSSI's Procurement Center of Excellence at achsupport@dc.gov for enrollment forms and to ensure that all the information that's on file for your organization is up to date. And it's when you're contacting ACH support at dc.gov, it's a good idea to copy DC vendor support at dc.gov on those emails, because they will track the response to your question. Thank you so much for responding about seeing the presentation and being able to hear me as well. All right, overview of the reimbursement request process. 21st Century payments are based on the reimbursement request system through OSSI's Enterprise Grant Management System, EGMS. EGMS can be accessed at grants.ossi.dc.gov. This is the same system that you inputted your application into, is also the same system that you make your reimbursement requests through. Organizations must demonstrate that they have sufficient funding and resources to maintain a 21st Century Community Learning Centers program during the reimbursement process. Program expenditures must be paid by the grantee to the payee, so to your vendors, prior to requesting reimbursement. It is not sufficient for expenditures to be incurred. You need to have already made the payments by the time you're making the reimbursement request to OSSI. OSSI anticipates that payments will be issued within 30 business days from the day a reimbursement request is submitted. Request to expedite payment in less than 30 days cannot be considered. 3 different offices within OSSI and DC's Office of the Chief Financial Officer have to process these payments, and 30 days is the expedited time. Requests for reimbursement must be submitted at least once quarterly, but no more than once monthly. OSSI highly recommends submitting reimbursement requests on a monthly basis to stay on track for meeting the requirements for your the rate of drawdown over the year of your grant. So for those rates of drawdown should match something close to what we show on the chart here. At the end of the first quarter, ending 12/31/21, so the end of this year that's coming up soon, you should have drawn down at least 10% of your total award. At the end of the second quarter, ending March 31st, 2022, in spring of next year, you should draw down at least 30%. At the end of the third quarter, on June 30th, 2022, you should have drawn down 60%, at least 60%. And at the end of the fourth quarter, which is into next school year, on September 30th, 2022, you need to have drawn down 85% or more if you're in the first or second year of your grant. And if you're in the third year of your grant, you need to have drawn down 100% by September 30 of 2022. During the review of a reimbursement request, OSSI program staff will consider all of the following requirements. OSSI recommends that grantees refer to this list prior to submitting a reimbursement request to ensure that the requests are approved the first time and don't have to be rejected for revision, because then that delays your payment. Expenditures have to align with the narrative and the budget included in the approved grantee application. Reimbursement requests with expenditures that conflict with the approved application will be rejected. Expenditures that have to have occurred within the applicable period of obligation for the award. So that's the same as the period of availability for the award. And so those expenditures have to have been occurred within that time period in order to be able to reimburse on this year's fiscal year's grant. The grantee must have sufficient funds remaining in the grant allocation in order to pay out the reimbursement request. Sufficient supporting documentation has to be provided. There are requirements that I'll get into that are for the initial submission, and then any other follow-up documentation must be submitted as well at OSSI's request. And expenditures are allowable under the purposes and requirements of the 21st Century Program and according to the cross-cutting federal cost principles that are related to expenditures under all federal programs. So all the expenses have to be allowable. So for required supporting documentation when you're doing your initial submission of your reimbursement request, grantees must provide the following for the equipment and the professional services categories. So any purchases under those budget categories. When you're making the initial request in EGMS, for professional services, you need to have a proof of receipt of the goods or services and a proof of payment. And then for equipment, you also need to have a proof of receipt for the goods and services and a proof of payment. For the other categories, you don't have to submit documentation up front in the initial submission, but OSSI staff may request follow-up documentation if there needs to be clarification about any of the requirements to approve the expenditure. Supporting documentation for equipment, those are individual items that cost $5,000 or more, and they're usually durable goods. So for example, smart boards, computing equipment. Now that laptops cost much less, they don't usually meet this threshold, but you may have other large equipment that's part of your program. And for those, you need to upload the invoice or proof of receipt of some sort, and then the proof of payment. For professional services, those are any contracted services that you're doing where the services being performed to implement your program. This could include consultants, evaluators, counselors, security staff, maintenance workers or maintenance contractors, therapists, instructional staff, and fees for professional development like in-service trainings or conference registrations. These documents should include the proof of purchase, such as the invoice or receipt, as well as the proof of payment. All supporting documentation, when you're uploading it in EGMS, please upload it in the same order so that it matches the line items as you input them into the reimbursement request tab in EGMS. Examples of supporting documentation, so proof of receipt of the goods or services could be a contract, particularly if the contract outlines a payment schedule. If it's a contract where you're paying it for the whole year and you're paying on a monthly basis or quarterly basis. Invoices for professional development, you want some sort of sign-in sheet or proof of attendance at the training. And then equipment sometimes involves a receiving report or a final, like not the shipping notice, but where you sign off for it after you've received it in the building. Proof of payment, examples of those could include an approved purchase order, a copy of a check, or payment confirmation screenshots if it's something like an ACH payment or an electronic payment, the copy of the confirmation that that payment's been made. When you're uploading the supporting documentation, we have a few tips for you to ensure that it can get approved the first time. The documentation should be clearly and distinctly labeled for each required category, particularly, especially if you can make it match to whatever the line item is and the name of the expenditure. It should be organized in the same order as the line items in EGMS. That makes it much easier for the OSSI staff to be able to review it and match up the documentation with each expenditure. Additional uploaded documentation that's in the initial submission won't be reviewed. You don't need to include that, but OSSI staff may need to request additional documentation as needed based on reimbursement request and reviewing it to get clarity about expenditures that are somehow, if there's a question around what the expenditure is or its allowability. That documentation must be uploaded separately. Once it is rejected back to you, you add it to the uploads again, and then it helps always to clearly label the actual document so it can be matched to the expenditure that's in question. The records retention requirement for all the documentation that supports each reimbursement request. These same documents must be retained by the grantee for at least 5 years. And that's not just what you upload to EGMS, but every proof of payment and invoice related to all of the line item expenditures, or in the case of salaries and benefits, the payroll records that match what was reimbursed in each reimbursement request. These records should be easily accessible during monitoring visits and for any audit conducted by OSSI staff or other authorized representatives. All right, so common issues that are faced in the when preparing reimbursement requests. Sometimes it's difficult to understand the difference between staff and a contractor, because you're talking about people who are doing work for your 21st century program. Staff should be categorized under the salaries and benefits budget category. You don't have to do supporting documentation because it's built into your payroll records that you would produce in case of a monitoring visit or an audit. And so those don't have to be submitted up front unless it's specifically requested by OSSI if there's some sort of clarification needed to understand the expenditure. Contractors should all fall under the professional services category, and those will require invoices and proof of payment, or if it's not an invoice, then other appropriate supporting document to show proof that the goods or services were received. And so those types of expenditures for contractors should be in the professional services category. That should also match what's in your approved application, how each of those individuals are categorized. Another common issue is related to supplement versus supplanting. So supplemental expenditures are used only for 21st century services and program activities. For example, you could have books purchased for a 21st century after-school literacy program, or a salary of a 21st century summer program. STEM staff, if there was a program related to STEM activities and you had a staffer, that salary would be a supplemental expenditure, so appropriate to reimburse for. Admission for a Saturday Academy participants to attend a museum exhibit related to the curriculum, that would be a supplemental expenditure appropriate for the 21st century grant. Supplanting is when it's used to replace locally or federally funded activities or services. So these are expenditures that are unrelated to the actual implementation of the 21st century grant program. These could include, for example, books purchased for a high school for the 10th grade English class, that's unrelated to the 21st century program, or salary for a summer school teacher, or bus rental for a football team to travel to their games. Those are not 21st century programs, and so those would be considered to be supplanting and would not be allowable to reimburse. Another common issue that comes up is related to insufficient expenditure description details. So the OSSI staffer that's reviewing your reimbursement request has to be able to match each line item expenditure to the descriptions that are in the approved budget. And so it also needs to explain its connection to the 21st century program. So for instance, just putting food as the full description in a line item is insufficient. And what would be better would be something like cooking ingredients to use in culinary class, right? So those are, you're saying that's what the food was purchased for. It was specifically to execute the program. Program supplies is very vague and does not offer enough information to determine if the costs of the items are reasonable. So when you're doing supplies, you need to list out at least some of the examples, usually the most highest dollar amount per item examples. So for instance, tools, soil, gloves for the gardening activity, right? So the gardening activity was described in the application, and the things that were purchased weren't program supplies, because that could be anything. Tools, soil, and gloves gives you an idea of about how much that should cost, and match that to amount the amount that is being requested. Cell phone costs is an insufficient description. It should explain how the cell phone costs are implementing the 21st century program. So in this case, as an example, we have cell phone costs to support communication between staff with parents as needed while in transit or in the field. Conference costs is also too vague. You should state exactly what was paid for. So in this case, it was airfare for 2 staffers to attend the Beyond School Hours conference that was in February in Orlando. That gives you an idea of about how much that airfare should cost, and that it was a flight for 2 people. So that's why that detail is what makes the description sufficient for the reimbursement request. And a last example, insufficient is instruction. That doesn't tell you anything about what was purchased. And a more appropriate description is reading teacher for 3rd grade 21st century participants. Teacher read to participants and facilitated discussions from our plant and animal curriculum in April. So that also gives you an indication of how long that person was paid for. So that also indicates the reasonableness of the expenditure, and it connects it to exactly what the person was doing to implement the 21st century program. All right, to access the reimbursement request and closeout report menu, you can check this list of all of your reimbursement requests in order to know that it was definitely submitted, and to check the status of it if you're wondering when it's going to get paid out. This menu is found in EGMS, and it's accessed by clicking the payments button on the EGMS account page, where it shows the dashboard for your organization. And then you click the view reimbursement request closeout reports button within that, and you'll see a menu that looks like this. And this will show you each of your reimbursement requests. So you should have 4 or 5 if you're submitting quarterly, and then you should have 12 or 13 of these if you're submitting monthly. To understand the different notations for statuses for reimbursement requests, we have this chart here. If the status says not submitted, that means the reimbursement request has been partially completed and saved in EGMS, but it hasn't been submitted to OSSI by the EGMS, the person in your organization who has EGMS administrator status. The consistency check notation means that the consistency check in the submit check section of the reimbursement request has not been completed. So before the administrator can submit a reimbursement request, you have to click on the consistency check button. It will run the validations that ensure that your reimbursement request is just going to run, doesn't have any basic errors, and then that will allow you to then submit it to OSSI for review. Submitted to OSSI as a status means that the reimbursement request consistency check was submitted, completed, and that the person with administrator's authorization in your organization has submitted the request. So that means that OSSI has your reimbursement request. If it says returned for changes, that means that the reimbursement request has been rejected because something in the review needs clarification, additional documentation, correcting something like matching up the program categories and budget categories to make it match the budget, things like this. And then if it says approved, that means that the OSSI staff has reviewed and approved the request and that you should be seeing payment. You can state, if it shows the date that it was approved, then you can assume that you'll receive payment for that reimbursement request approximately 20 days after that approval date. All right, tips for successfully requesting the reimbursement. I'm just checking the questions tool to make sure that nothing's been sent in. I believe most of y'all are returning recipients of this grant, so you've probably seen this before, so I hope this is all a good review and refresh for you. Otherwise, if it's new, please let me know if you have any questions. One question has come through, if we'll get a copy of the presentation. Yes, since I'm filling in and supporting a little bit, I'm not sure. I have the presentation. You will receive the presentation at some point. I actually thought it was sent out this morning, but this is making me think that it has not been, so I'll make sure that happens this afternoon. All right, so one main tip that we have for successfully getting your reimbursement requests approved the first time around is to ask yourself the same questions. The organization version of the request, of the review of the request that we also make at OSSI. So you want to ask, how does the cost support the program elements? Meaning, how are the implementation activities addressing the critical needs that were identified in the needs assessment, and then formulating the strategic goal, which gives you a measurable objective, and then you're reviewing the performance of it. So you always have that continuous improvement cycle. Where does this expenditure fit into that cycle? And support the actual administration of the program. And you can do this by asking yourself, do I really need this? Does the program need this? Is this going to be necessary to program implementation? Is the minimum amount I need to spend? Is this the minimum amount I need to spend to meet my need? So that speaks to allowability related to reasonable cost. Is the expense targeted to valid programmatic and administrative considerations? So that means, is the expense related to the activities that were approved in the application? Do I have the capacity to use what I'm purchasing? That's again related to reasonableness, as well as the prevention of waste, fraud, and abuse. Number 5, did I pay a fair rate and can I prove it? So that's related to your procurement practices. And if I were asked to defend this purchase, would I be able to do so? Would you, can you fully vouch that this expenditure that you're putting in the reimbursement request would pass muster if it was questioned in a monitoring visit or an audit? I have an additional question here that I'm trying. This does not give me. All right. EGMS is extremely glitchy. In order for our invoices to change in EGMS once we save it, do you have any recommendations to address this? So I'm going to ask one clarifying question. If this is related to uploading a document, or if it is related to making a change to a line item in an expenditure request that you've already created. And I think I'll just answer it. So if you have a change to an invoice that's happens between the time you submitted the reimbursement request or you realize that there was a mistake in one of the line items, you can just ping your grant manager and ask them to please return the reimbursement request to you, whether or not they've reviewed it already. And then as soon as you have it returned and it shows up as returned for changes in the status, you can just go in and make the changes to the line item and then hit save at the bottom of every single tab and then resubmit it. If you're having difficulty uploading the documentation, the main tips around that are to not include any punctuation in your document titles, so the name of the document that you're uploading, and to also keep the title as short as possible. So we understand that we ask for reference information when you're naming the document so that we can easily match it to the line items. So that's aided by uploading them in order if possible. And it's also aided, it's okay to use abbreviations. So if you have Prof Serve for professional services, line item 1, or a name that it's easily identifiable within the description, the first couple words in the description, something along those lines, or even the dollar amount, but avoid things like dollar signs and ampersands and underscores, because sometimes those do not upload well when the document is named something like that. I think you also can only upload Excel documents and Word documents and PDFs. So also try to only use those formats. Please respond again in the questions. I can't actually see, I'm trying to see all the questions. So please respond again if that didn't adequately answer your question, and you can give me a little bit more detail about the trouble you're encountering. All right, additional tips for submitting the reimbursement request. Only submit expenditures that align with the approved budget. So again, always look back to the application and make sure that it matches what you're inputting into the reimbursement request. Link each itemized expenditure to the category, so program category and budget category, in which it was listed in the approved budget. That very often is something that reimbursement requests have to be returned for. So it'll be something is sitting in professional services when it should be in supplies and materials, or it'll have the program category will be something like it's listed under instruction instead of under support services or something like that. So make sure those match up with what you have in the application. And lastly, provide sufficient detail to demonstrate allowability for each itemized expenditure. So that's the thing where state what part of your 21st century program this expenditure is supporting or implementing or staffing, whichever it is. Okay. When you're uploading the supporting documents into the reimbursement request, please name the files based on what the budget category they apply to. For example, name the files for uploaded contractor or vendor invoices as professional services. So again, you can shorten that if you need to, if you're finding you're having a hard time uploading documents because your file names are too long. At least give an indication so that if someone's looking at 10 different documents, can pick out which ones match which line items. And please provide additional information, clarification, or revisions within 3 business days. So if the reimbursement request is returned to you, the way to keep your payment moving along is to respond to it right away, at least within 3 business days. All right, requesting budget adjustments for 21st century grants. So if you find, especially towards the end of the year, that your expenditures are conflicting or not in perfect alignment with your approved budget, you won't be able to get approval on those reimbursement requests, and you'll need to make a change to that budget by submitting a budget adjustment, or in EGMS it's called an amendment. And you need to create the amendment in EGMS on your dashboard and then submit it to your OSSI grant manager to get it approved. And then after that, once those corrections are made, with realignment or whatever it is in your case, you'll be able to keep submitting new reimbursement requests on that newly approved amended budget. If you need more information about that specifically, or actually anything related to the 21st century grants, you can always email 21stcclc.info@dc.gov. All right, we have a brief quiz, and I'll warn you ahead of time that it's tricky. So in review of what we've talked about, especially one of the main reasons that reimbursement requests are returned, which slows down our approval process and your payment, is descriptions that don't provide enough detail. So which of the following descriptions provide sufficient detail for the OSSI staff to be able to approve it? A, school event to enhance students' learning and application of science curriculum to encourage parent involvement. B, this will include supplies such as paper, pens, ink cartridges, tracking kits, etc., and other items to ensure that all aspects of the project are implemented effectively. And C, expenses during field trip to the Smithsonian. So since I am delayed in logging in, I'm just going to move along, not give you the proper thinking time I would normally give you for that. So the trick is that it's none of the above. Each of these examples has an element that's makes it difficult or not approvable in a reimbursement request. For school event to enhance students' learning and application of science curriculum to encourage parent involvement. That explains what the event was for and its connection to implementation of the program, but it doesn't say what was purchased. So the items that were purchased for the event, for example, flip charts, markers, Post-it notes, and welcome signs or something like that, are all things that were actually purchased for this event to encourage parent involvement in the science curriculum, right? So those, you have to name what was actually purchased as a part of the description, as well as its connection to the 21st century program. For B, this will include supplies such as paper, pens, ink cartridges, tracking kits, and other items. So that's an excellent list of the type of supplies that were purchased, but it doesn't say what the event is. What were the supplies used for? Were they part of the classroom activities or the after-school program activities, or were they part of parent involvement, or were they part of administration? All of that needs to be something, what these were used for also needs to be included in the description. And then C, expenses during field trip to the Smithsonian. That doesn't explain what was paid for. So a better description would be something like admission and metro fare for 30 students for Smithsonian field trip, October 15th, something like that, right? So at $20 per student, something like that, because that lets me know how much where the total amount came from and whether or not that's reasonable. It also lets me know that the field trip was part of the 21st century program that was approved in the application. All right, the notifications that come through. So I'm just going to check the questions again. Okay, I'm going to hold these questions that have come through for the end, just to get through this very last slide about the notifications. So if a reimbursement request has to be returned to you, you will get an email from the OSSI program staff. You'll get a notification from EGMS saying this reimbursement request has been returned to you. You will also get a follow-up email from the 21st century staff that explains what additional information, clarification, revision is needed in order to add that so that you can resubmit it and we can approve it. If it's resubmitted after having been rejected and requires another rejection, the OSSI staff will probably make a call at that point to make sure that the comments that were included in the rejection and the revision request were understood. An example of this type of notification would be something like, we reviewed reimbursement request number 1. It was submitted on Halloween for $10,000 and the following issues need to be resolved. So under professional services, we need an upload of an invoice or proof of payment, or under supplies, explain what the specific purchases that were made were. So for that may be an instance where it just said program supplies and it doesn't say such as highlighters, crayons, and I don't know, calculators. So that for 50 students, approximately $10 each. That gives you an idea to determine the reasonable cost of the expenditure. All right, so now we have questions and feedback. I'm also I'll just move to this contact information page while I'm speaking and addressing the questions so that you can write it down if that's helpful to you. All right, so we have another question that says, are we required to upload all receipts, invoices for program materials and supplies? And so No, on the initial submission of the reimbursement request. So the first time you're sending it in for the program category supplies and materials, you don't have to upload all the invoices or receipts or proof of payment. Sometimes it's just a receipt from a store or like a P-card information, whatever the documentation is. In the initial submission of a reimbursement request, like when you're first submitting it, you don't have to upload all those receipts and payments. But if the OSSI reviewer has a question or needs to better understand what supplies were ordered or how many of them, or just needs to figure out what the payment date was and ensure that that matches whatever it is, they may return it to you if there's something that needs more support and say, could you please upload the proof of payment for this expenditure? So you'll need to, in your revision, upload one document at OSSI's request. So when you first submit it in, you only have to do proof of receipt and proof of payment for all the professional services line items, as well as the equipment line items. For salary, for supplies and materials, and the other tabs, I'm trying to remember what they are and I'm blanking on it right now, but the other tabs, you do not have to upload things up front. But an OSSI reviewer, an OSSI staffer may request that you upload additional documentation if they just need more support to be able to approve the reimbursement request. But that's going to be on an as needed individual basis. For another question, this sounds like this is related to dealing with the EGMS. After entering the line items, you realize you forgot one and needed to insert a line. Oh, does the system allow you to insert a line? So it won't let you insert a line item midway through. If you're trying to do line items in order, it will only, but it will let you, you can use the add additional entries button to add more at the end. And so you, the best way to do that, so it's not ideal if you're trying to go in an order to keep it organized. It's not ideal to be like, oh, I missed one and then have to stick it on the end. But you could, if you label your document well, you can sort of indicate like out of order, prof serve, I don't know, contractor name, $3,000 or something like that. So that would at least cue the reviewer to be like, oh, okay, I see this one's out of order, but I see where it is now. I know where it fits because I have enough clues in the name of the document to figure out and match it up. So just try and just understand that the OSSI program staff is looking at it completely blank. They don't know, they don't have any reference to do it, but they need to be able to match up each document that you upload with a line item. So if you can at least make it as clear as possible which goes with which when you're naming the documents or ordering them in the upload, that's very helpful and that will speed up the review. There's one more question. Will I be able to view the notifications in the system itself? So if you, in your application, so not inside the reimbursement request, but in the application itself, you uploaded contact information for a set of people. The person that's listed as, I can't remember exactly what the title is, but it's something like grant manager to be contacted by EGMS. That person will receive an email. So different organizations set up their contacts differently. There's also an opportunity in the application to say, add additional people to receive EGMS notifications. So that's the automated notification that will come from EGMS to whomever's listed in that contact list to say, your reimbursement request has been returned, or your reimbursement. Actually, I don't think it sends you a notification if it's been approved. You just have to open up EGMS and look in the payments list to see whatever the status is currently. The notification that will come to explain what needs to be, so when you go to open it up, because it's been returned, you'll have a review checklist or a review summary that will have comments in it related to whatever's in the reimbursement request that needs to be changed. You need to make sure that your pop-up blocker in your browser is disabled for EGMS so that those will pop up and do it. And then you will also receive an email from the OSSI program person at the same time that says, here's what needs to be changed. If you don't receive that notification, if they happen to not send an email that time or something like that, but you do see that you have a returned reimbursement request, and if you don't understand the comments that are in the review summary or something like that, you can't figure out what needs to be changed, you can always just email 21st Century CCL at cclc.info@dc.gov and just say, hey, I got reimbursement request number 3 back. I can't understand the checklist. Can you please tell me what needs to be changed? And that will move your resubmission along quicker and help you get it approved more quickly. To clarify, the line items and professional services change once we save with the attached voices, causing us to reorder all the invoices. Okay, that is interesting. I see what you're saying. I am not sure about that. I could only refer you to the help desk because that does sound like something glitchy that's happening. I think that's also where you could really use the naming of the documents to provide as much of a clue to which line item it matches to. But I see what you're saying. And so I'll try and find out about that, but I honestly I'm not sure exactly how to fix that. One more question is, do you submit all items for specific line item together? That would be nice and a good way to keep it organized. So say you have one PDF is the invoice and then one PDF is the copy of the check. If you combine those into a single PDF that matches that line item, that would be easier for the OSSI staffer to review because they don't have to open as many documents to see the whole, both sides of the transaction. So I would suggest that, but I would consider naming the document invoice and payment or something like that, invoice dash payment. So that would clue the person opening the document to, scroll down and see both pages, right? That you're saying both the invoice and the payment are in this single multi-page document. I'm going to pause briefly just to see if there's any follow-up questions. I hope I'm being clear enough and providing enough information, but I'm happy to hold for a couple more minutes to make sure. All right, I'm not seeing anything else so far. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. We know that grantees are always trying to get it right. Oh wait, sorry, one more follow-up. Each transaction needs to be uploaded separately, not in a package with all the invoices. So I'm hesitant to say one way or the other because I could see doing the review with a single PDF, like a single multi-page PDF for everything. I think that some reviewers would find that easier and some would find that more difficult. I think I would err on the side of, but the thing is if that's explicit and it's ordered nicely so that if I'm pulling up a document on one screen and I'm looking at your line items on the other screen, I can go A, B, B, C, C, D, D, right? So that's what we're trying to get to. I feel like I want to say that having an invoice and payment document for each line item that's needed, only for professional services and only for equipment, would be easier to review because I would be able to see the vendor name or the item amount, something like that, and that would make me be able to match it up. Whereas if I'm scrolling through one large document, that seems like it could potentially be more difficult to match it up. I could also see a program manager saying that a single document is easier. So I'm reluctant to give a single rule. The important part is to have it be easy to match it up. So if you feel like you can order a multi-page document really in an organized way, maybe with like reference names or something like that, so it was easy to see which was which, I think that could work very nicely. I think maybe it's a little bit easier, depending on what your situation is with having to scan in all these documents and rename them and things like that. It seems a little bit easier to have a document that matches each line item. So if you got 6 line items, you got 6 documents. Each individual document is a proof of receipt and a proof of payment. I'm sorry that response was a little bit ambiguous. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the reviewers, and I can kind of see it going both ways. It seems to me that it would be easier to have a document that matches each line item, though. But I also understand it's annoying to upload to EGMS, so I could see trying to find ways to make that more efficient. All right, I'm going to bring this to a close. As I started to say, thank you so much for spending some of your time this afternoon with us. We know that grantees are always trying to get it right, run a really tight program, and that we also need to make sure that we're following all of the rules of federal programs and doing it within the EGMS system, which is always has room for improvement. So thank you so much for spending your time with us. If you have any follow-up questions, please email the 21st cclc.info@dc.gov email, and that will get responded to, and let us know what else we can do. I'll make sure that this slide deck gets out to you in a PDF format, so you'll have the document. You can go back and refer to it later. And have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you again.